All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're going to be talking about decision trees.
I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, this is one that a lot of people have asked about. Decision trees kind of like they're the foundation.
Yeah.
They're sort of like the gateway to machine learning.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
So we're going to take a look at what exactly they are, how they work, and maybe some of the ways that we can actually use them in our own lives.
Perfect.
So I guess the first question is, like, for someone who's never heard of a decision tree, what is it?
So a decision tree, it's a way that we can model decisions. It's very visual, and it really is kind of like a choose your own adventure story.
Right.
So you start at the top of the tree, and there's a question, and then depending on the answer to that question,
Right.
you go down a different branch, and then you get another question, and so on and so forth, until you get to the bottom of the tree where you actually get your decision.
Okay, that's really helpful. So it's like a flow chart in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a flow chart with yes/no questions.
Right.
Or like multiple choice questions, and
Right.
it kind of narrows down the possibilities as you go.
Yeah, exactly. Each question is designed to split the data in a way that makes the resulting sets of data more pure.
Okay.
So, like, for example, if we're thinking about like a bank deciding who to give a loan to,
Right.
the first question might be like, well, what's your credit score? And then if it's above a certain number, then you go down one branch. If it's below a certain number, you go down another branch.
So it's kind of like at every step you're trying to make the groups more and more similar to each other within the group.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, the ideal scenario is that by the time you get to the bottom of the tree, like, all of the good loan applicants are in one group and all of the bad loan applicants are in another group.
Okay, so it's all about kind of segmenting things into clear categories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So you mentioned this idea of data purity and how the algorithm's like choosing these questions to make these pure groups. How does it actually know what's a good question to ask?
So that's where the concept of the Giannini index comes in.
The Giannini index.
And that sounds kind of scary, but really it's just a way of measuring how mixed up the data is at a particular point in the tree.
Okay.
So the higher the Gini index, the more mixed up the data is. The lower the Gini index, the more pure the data is.
So it's looking for the questions that kind of give it the lowest Gini index to keep making those pure groups.
Yeah, exactly. And so the algorithm will like try out a bunch of different questions and see which one gives it the lowest Gini index. And then that's the question it will use to split the data at that point.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like a trial and error process for the algorithm.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's constantly searching for the best way to split the data.
Now, one thing that I came across in the research was this idea of overfitting. And that seems to be a potential problem with decision trees. What exactly is overfitting?
Yeah, so overfitting is when the decision tree gets so good at splitting the data that it's used to train on that it basically memorizes the answers.
Okay.
But then when it's given new data that it's never seen before, it doesn't know what to do because it hasn't actually learned the underlying patterns. It's just memorized the specific examples it was given.
So it's almost like a student who crams for a test and they can remember the answers, but they don't really understand the materials, so they can't apply it to new problems.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
So how do we prevent overfitting? Like, are there techniques that can kind of keep the tree from becoming too complex?
Yeah, absolutely. So one technique is called pruning, and that's basically where you like cut off some of the branches of the tree to make it simpler.
Okay.
And the idea there is that by making the tree simpler, you're less likely to overfit the data.
So it's finding that balance between accuracy and complexity.
Right, exactly. You don't want the tree to be too simple because then it won't be able to capture the nuances of the data. But you also don't want it to be too complex because then you risk overfitting.
Now, all of the examples that we've been talking about have been using numerical data like credit scores and things like that. But what about when you have data that isn't numerical, like color or location or something like that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that's where the concept of categorical variables comes in.
Okay.
So categorical variable is just a variable that can take on one of a finite number of values.
Okay.
So like color, for example, it could be red, blue, green, yellow, whatever.
Right.
And so there are ways of dealing with categorical variables in decision trees. One common way is to just convert them into numerical variables.
Oh, okay.
So like, for example, you could assign a number to each color, like 1 for red, 2 for blue, 3 for green, and so on.
And then you can use that in the decision tree just like any other number.
Exactly, yeah.
And what happens if you have missing data? Like, what if there's just like a gap in the information that you're trying to use to build a tree?
Yeah, so that's another great question. And there are a few different ways of dealing with missing data. One common way is to just use the most common value for that variable.
So,
So like, for example, if you're looking at like people's ages and you're missing the age for one person, you could just use the average age of all the other people in the data set.
oh, okay, so you're kind of like filling in the blanks with the most
Mhm.
likely value.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I found really interesting in the research was this emphasis on visualizing decision trees. Why is visualization so important for this particular algorithm?
Yeah, so one of the really cool things about decision trees is that they're very interpretable.
Yeah.
And what that means is that it's really easy to understand how they're making decisions.
Right.
And so by visualizing the tree, you can actually see like the logic of the tree laid out in front of you.
So it's not just a black box. It's something you can actually like trace through and see how it's making the decision.
Exactly. Yeah. And
Huh.
so that makes it really useful for things like debugging the tree or explaining the tree to someone who's not a data scientist.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I guess to kind of wrap things up here, w- we've learned that decision trees are a powerful tool for making decisions based on data. They're kind of like flowcharts that ask a series of questions to split the data into peer groups. They use the Gianni index to figure out which questions are the best to ask, and we have to be careful about overfitting. But there are techniques like pruning that can help us prevent that. And then one of the really cool things about decision trees is that they're very visual and interpretable, so we can actually see how they're making decisions.
Yeah, that's a great summary.
So as a final thought for our listeners out there, we've talked about some of the ways that decision trees are used in like finance and healthcare and things like that. But
Yeah.
where else do you see decision trees being used, or where do you think they could be used in the future?
Oh man, there's so many possibilities. I think anytime that you have a situation where you need to make a decision based on data, a decision tree could be a useful tool. So like, for example, I could see decision trees being used to personalize education.
Okay.
So like based on a student's past performance and their learning style, a decision tree could be used to recommend like what courses they should take or what materials they should study.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, or like in marketing, decision tree could be used to decide like which customers to target with a particular ad campaign.
Okay.
Or even in like personal life, you could use a decision tree to help you decide like what to make for dinner or what to watch on TV.
Right. It's really kind of any decision that has multiple factors that go into it.
Exactly. Yeah, and so the more data you have, the more powerful the decision tree can be.
That's a great point. And I think that's something that's really important for people to keep in mind is that these algorithms are only as good as the data that we feed them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out, as they say.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So make sure you're using good data. Make sure you understand the problem that you're trying to solve. And then a decision tree can be a really powerful tool to help you make better decisions.
I completely agree.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great having you.
Awesome.
All right.
Bye.